Good morning still for this second part of the education and training session. I had an easy and challenging job because I was asked to give a presentation on supporting access to key infrastructure and pan-European research, and I decided to introduce lessons learned. So what we have learned from some access to big infrastructures. So for doing that, I start with a brief introduction. I have selected 3 projects on the basis also of the organizers of the FISA conference that were indicating to me which type of projects. So the projects are Talisman, Nugenia Plus, the Gentle. You have already heard about Gentle. So we'll go briefly through the 3 projects, then give some conclusions and suggestions, some outlook, and then of course the acknowledgements for having received the informations and for this presentation. Now, in terms of introduction, what I've seen looking on the different projects is that for accessing the infrastructure, there have been proposed in the past and also currently different schemes. And the different schemes, I have categorized them in 3 big areas. So the one is the so-called III, and I guess III stands for Integrated Infrastructure Initiative. And if you look carefully on this access scheme, it is very much topic focused, and one objective is to pool facilities. Normally the III has 3 components. One is called networking, the other one transnational access, and I will focus only on this component, and then the joint research initiative. Another type of projects or scheme that has so-called mobility grant, but at the end of the day is addressing the access to infrastructure, are the typical R&D projects financed by the European Commission through the RTD. And here the focus is on a topical area, on a research area, and as for instance the Nugenia looking on generation 2 and 3 reactors. So mainly the focus of this type of projects is on research, and the projects are built via work packages and tasks with specific research activities, but then you find a work package dedicated to mobility grant, and the mobility grant has a direct connection to access to infrastructure. And then the third type of projects which we have discussed a lot this morning are the so-called ENT projects, so the education and training projects. And when you look more carefully on this type of projects, at least in the nuclear reactor safety area, they are more people-centered. So there is no emphasis on the topic. There is more emphasis on the students, on the researchers, on professional development, and things like that. So I will go through these 3 type of accesses. I've picked 3 projects that respond to this access schemes. And the 3 projects are the Talisman, which is a so-called was a III project, where the one objective was to pool facilities. Then I will address the mobility grant that were inside the Nugenia Plus project, and the student research experience, which was access to infrastructure included in the Gentle project. Let's start with the Talisman project. So again, this was pooling facilities. Here the topic that was addressed was the actinide science, and the idea was to pool all the infrastructures in Europe around this topic, or working in this topic of actinide science. The 3 pillars of the Talisman project were the supporting the transnational access to infrastructure. And here what I want to point out is the word transnational, which puts some, let's say, limits on how the access to infrastructure should have occurred. Then there were joint research activities and the promotion of training and education activities, which translated in schools, organization of schools and workshops. What the facilities that were pulled in the Talisman project are shown here. So you have the hot labs in CA, in the GRC, in the KIT, in the Chalmers University, Rossendorf, and NNL in the UK, and the beamlines. And there were 3 beamlines, the beamline in KIT, the Anka, the cyclotron in PSI, and the beamline in Rossendorf. So 9 infrastructures were proposed. They were all working on actinide science, quite unique infrastructures, and based on these infrastructures, the access scheme was implemented. Now, for the implementation of the access scheme, for the 3 projects that I will discuss, you will find, I will show almost the same type of preparing the access scheme. So there were, the first is the call, the second is the submission of the proposal and the evaluation of the proposal, and then the third is the assignment of the grant. However, each of the 3 projects has slightly different approaches, and I think this is worthwhile also to investigate more deeply if there is a way to harmonize the approaches. Now let's start with the Talisman project. So there were calls, I guess it was, I don't see it from here, so twice per year, so 2 times per year, Talisman opened the call and asked for submission of proposals. These proposals were then evaluated and ranked by the Project Scientific Advisory Committee. And if I correctly remember, this advisory committee was a committee, let's say, built by a group of people external of the project, so were not directly part of the project. And there was a ranking criteria defined. You see them on the bottom part of the slides, what type of ranking criteria. And at the end, during the project, the grants were assigned, and you see here the numbers. 107 proposals were submitted, and I think 91 of them were granted with access to infrastructures. Why the other, let's say, 7 and 9, so about 20 were not granted, I cannot tell you in detail, so each single had a different issue, and the report of Talisman also explains what type of issues were there. Some numbers, some more details on the numbers for the access to the infrastructure. What you see here is on the left hand, which were the hot labs that were, let's say, accessed. And the distribution is not so even, so there were some laboratories that, like for instance, I'm not able to see, so I'll go down. So some laboratories like here, the KIT, or I think this is the GRC, if I correctly see it, that had, so here this have more access with respect to, for instance, CEA or NNL. The other interesting point was that the access to infrastructure were subdivided into 3 scopes or areas. So there was one area which were the actinide chemistry for separation, for the geological repository, and then the actinide materials, so more the solid states, which were fuels, but not only fuels, also basic properties of actinide materials. And interesting is that the scope number 3, so the actinide materials, had the highest number of interests, if I can say like that, followed by the chemistry, and then the scope number 2, which is the geological repository. And here the other interesting point is the distribution of the countries where the students or the research groups were coming from. And there are 2 things which are quite interesting. First of all, in Talisman, it was possible to grant also access to countries outside Europe, so the researchers, students coming from countries outside Europe, China, USA, or Russia. I guess this was possible because there was, in any case, a cooperation agreement between the European Commission and institutions from these 3 countries outside Europe. And the other interesting point is, you see here, France had the highest access, and however, CA the lowest. And this because it was transnational, so meaning that a team or a group coming from France could not access CA, should have gone to another research institute outside the country. So this could be an explanation why the CA was not that high in terms of access, but the French teams were applying a lot in this field. The next is the Nugenia Plus. So Nugenia Plus was a project which was a combination between coordination and support action and collaborative project. So you know what this is. The coordination support action was more the part that had to coordinate and implement the Nugenia Association, and the collaborative project was the part dedicated to R&D activities, and Nugenia in particular R&D activities for generation 2 and 3 reactors. In Nugenia, they had also a work package for mobility grants. And here they put other type of limitations, and the limitations were short training periods, less than 1 month, mainly for postdoc students and researchers, and then long training periods, however long training meaning maximum 3 months for more experienced staff. I have to say, I was trying to understand better what was meant with more experienced staff. I couldn't really identify the points, but if someone from Nugenia is here and can then explain, it would be very helpful. So again here, the scheme exactly the same as the previous one. We had the calls. However, in the case of Nugenia, they decided to have a continuous open call. So whenever someone had interest to use the mobility grant from Nugenia, they could apply, and then the proposal was evaluated. Here the evaluation of the proposal was done inside the project, inside the work package, so the let's say the partners of the work packages were doing the evaluation of the proposal on the basis of given criteria, and Nugenia has decided the type of criteria they wanted to use. And then the proposals were finally approved by the management board of the Nugenia Plus. And at the end we had the grants assigned, and even if in this case there was a continuous open call, there were only 18 grants assigned. So the number is not that high, and there is also some interesting analysis done inside the Nugenia Plus project why this low number. In any case, interesting also here to see the distribution of the applicants. So they were coming, and here it was limited to EU countries, so coming from different EU countries. Interesting to see Romania was quite interested in applying to the Nugenia. And the hosting organization, also here quite even distribution, I guess over the partners that were participating in the Nugenia Plus. For what concerns the technical areas, Nugenia, as you know, has a number of technical areas, but the 18 grants were focused mainly on, here I think is I don't remember exactly what the integrity, yeah, this more the integrity and the severe accident. So there we have the peak of accessing, and it's not, I think also here it's not that clear. Well, the problem in Nugenia were, first of all, there was not given information about the possibility that these were grants viable. So the European nuclear community was not aware that there was this possibility to use these grants and do the access. So maybe in some technical area, let's say the tam-tam was giving, and here there was the access. In others, this was not occurring. So this was one of the main self-criticism done inside the project. Now the third project that I want, and this is more the people-centered project, so here I will not talk about actinide science or generation 2 and 3 reactors, but this was really focused on ENT programs or coordination of ENT programs in the field of nuclear fission technology, so the GENTLE project. GENTLE had also 3 components. One was the student research experience to facilitate the access to laboratories, and I will address this part. There was also a second part on inter-semester courses for graduate and postgraduate students on specialized topics, and here I put some of the topics, and you see it was really wide-ranged. The consortium was 13 or 14 universities and research centers, and they were offering these inter-semester courses from fuel to safeguard to nuclear data, waste management, etc. And then there was the professional course. It was mentioned by Walter before. Just briefly to say it was, at the beginning, it was thought to do a classroom course for professional development. The course was built, it was advertised, we put it almost everywhere, but the interest was almost zero. And instead of continuing and insisting with the professional course, we decided to change the approach and to prepare the MOOC. And you have seen the numbers that Walter has shown. With the MOOC, we had much more success. So we reached out, and we could, how can I say, awake the interest of a wider community, and in this case, indeed, also beyond Europe. Okay, now for the access to the infrastructure, again here we had calls. In the case of GENTLE, it was a call 1 per year. It was less limited in terms of time for a project to be performed or an access to be performed in the case of GENTLE, because it was said that one can have activity done between 1 and 24 months, so quite long, but the medium value was between 6 and 8 months. So normally we had not that long access to infrastructures, but there was given the possibility to go up to 2 years. Also here there was criteria for evaluating the proposal. A committee was put in place. The committee was belonging to the project again, in this case, was put in place, and they decided also who to grant the access. So it didn't went to executive board of the project or things like that. And then the grants were assigned, and during the 4 years projects, 84 grants were assigned, and this was corresponding to emptying the budget. So the full budget was spent in the case of GENTLE with the 84 grants. Also here some numbers in terms of applicants, so I have to go again closer. So you see here let's say the interest was almost over all European countries, nuclear and non-nuclear, which was quite interesting to see. The peak in the case of GENTLE was in Italy and France, so maybe there the information was arriving much more with respect to the other countries, but in any case we had also from other countries. If you look on the access, what is here interesting is if we put together the GRC facility in Hel and in Karlsruhe, the GRC facilities were the most one where the interest was coming up, followed then by the SCK. We had quite interesting here, SCK and KIT. And now the topics. You see here it's a mess, yeah, because there was no restriction on the topic. You could do everything inside GENTLE. I don't go here in the details. You will see in the slides or in the paper where we have put the details. But just to say, it went from reactor physics. We had molten salt reactors. We had cladding materials for lead fast reactors. And interesting also, we had applications in both areas, modeling and experimental, so laboratory. So we were also considering the so-called modeling platforms. They were also open for the access. And you see here the share. Of course, the share for the experimental part is much higher, and you can imagine that it is more difficult to get into a specialized laboratory, maybe accessing a modeling platform, staying at home. I guess with the internet and all this new technologies, you can do it also staying at home. A laboratory, you have to go and to access it. So we have noticed that the experimental part was much more stronger, the interest with respect to the modeling part. So this was my last slide in terms of summarizing the 3 projects. Now the conclusions and some suggestion. So as said before, the access scheme, and I would say that all projects we can more or less put into these 3 type of schemes. One, pooling facilities, so very much topic oriented. Then we had mobility grants in specific research areas like generation 2 and 3 reactors. And then we had access scheme more people-oriented like the GENTLE, but also the INN Plus project mentioned by Walter. It's very much people-oriented. It's not looking too much what type of facility or research area is addressed. What are the lessons learned? Now, reading the reports, what I've noticed is all reports, everybody was complaining about difficulties to put in place the administrative, the financial, and the scientific rules. And here the question is, would be a harmonized approach more, well, let's say more effective? Because all projects have lost in bracket, of course, time to define first the boundary conditions. Maybe if the boundary conditions are defined, are already there, one applies the rules, could be something more effective. Could be not if not everybody can apply the rules. So it's very much depending, and I think here the community needs to find a good solution in order to continue with this type of schemes, because they were in any case all successful and very much appreciated. The other point that I have noticed was a problem both in GENTLE and in the Nugenia Plus. The first year there was not that much applications arriving. And in GENTLE, I remember we were asking ourselves why. And then we discovered that the students that we were addressing GENTLE, they didn't know that we had this type of possibility put in place. And in particular, Dario Manara, he was responsible for the SRE. He took his luggage and started to travel and to advertise in university, asking for giving presentation, advertising in universities the possibility for GENTLE, and I guess similar initiatives were done also by the other project partners. And this helped in the second year then to kick off really the access and the successful accomplishment of the activity. In Nugenia Plus, as I said before, it was exactly the same. So we have to really take care about advertising and reaching out in the European nuclear community, and not strictly the nuclear, but also the, let's say, the universities or the areas that are nuclearized, as said before. So what can be the suggestions well, first of all, I would say that this type of schemes should continue because they are interesting. They help in hands-on training and in professional development, both for students and for young research teams, young and also less young research teams. Maybe one can think to blend mobility grants at pooled facilities with people-oriented schemes. And this goes more in the direction to what Michelle was saying. One needs to understand what type of professional profile is needed, and then in this area trying to offer possibility to develop these professional profiles. So what I mean is connect access scheme like Actinet, Nugenia, Esni, Bella with schemes like Gentle and Enen Plus. Maybe also the organization of open access schemes through one entity could be helpful, and I was thinking an entity could be Enen, for instance, that could do this. Because then the one entity would be more, in this case, it could be more easier to harmonize the administrative, financial, and scientific rules, and it could help in coordinating the various topical areas and pooled facilities and connect them better to the people. So this could be an idea on how to implement in future open access scheme. Now the outlook. I've put here, I find this in the internet, and I thought it's really nice because it says that it is for free. And indeed, in the JRC, we have started since a couple of years open access. You see here the link to the open access of the JRC and the objectives, why we are doing that. The JRC facilities belongs to the European community. So each European member state normally should have the right to access our laboratories and to do some research work. And for granting this, we have now launched this open access initiative, including our nuclear laboratories. For the time being, if you go on this site, I think, on this internet site, I think you will find the call for the access to the facilities in Hale, and we are preparing now the call for the access to the facilities in Petten. In addition, I guess you have all read the work program of this call here, and there is also the administrative arrangement between JRC and RTD to support access of European research teams, students, and small and medium enterprise to the nuclear JRC infrastructures. So here, I suppose it will be a project that where the JRC makes available the nuclear facilities, and through the RTD funding, mobility grants can be put in place so that who wants to come to JRC to do R&D activities has also the possibility to access a mobility grant. So that's the philosophy behind that, and you will see then certainly how we will implement and we will hopefully advertise also this. Now, my last slide for the acknowledgement. Of course, this presentation was possible thanks to a lot of people working in the different projects. So in particular, I wanted to thank Dario. He has sent me the informations on Gentle. For Talisman, it was Stefan. In the Nugenia Plus, I get through SEK and CA the informations, and thanks also to the Enen Consortium that has provided to me with a lot of reports on access scheme. And I want to thank also Gérard because he did really a very nice review and gave some interesting suggestions to me. Okay, that's all. If you have questions, I try to answer them. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much. The floor is open if, okay, I see one in the back.
This is not a question, but actually answer to your question, because you had two questions to Nugenia, and as former coordinator of Nugenia Plus, I can answer those. First, we had only these short grants because we didn't get the applications for the long 1 to 3 months grants. And then why we had these two areas, structural integrity and severe accidents. It's, as you said, because in these areas you have laboratories, very expensive experimental facilities, and that was why people wanted to go to those places. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one remark there, one question there. I think we could start with the remark because I think it is on the same subject.
Yes. Thank you, Concetta, for this presentation, this summary. You tried to make an overview of the activities we have in this mobility in transnational access. That is true that till now we do not have access to Euratom, to fellowships and to Marie Curie supporting actions, actions that could support mobility. So we had, I would just want to say that these instruments are different, and because they address different issues. First of all, the TALIS. It is transnational access to large infrastructures. This was conceived in order to allow, that is the transnational also, the question of transnational and the large are important here, that a PhD student wants to make some experiments to validate something, but the facility does not exist in his country. In another country, we have this facility. So we supported that mobility in order to make, that was also the reason that it was not long in time. It was for specific purpose, to get profit for facilities from another country, a European country, and maybe from abroad, larger. So this was addressing that we don't need to build an infrastructure in a country if this infrastructure exists in another member state. And we could arrange to use it. Coming now to the Nugenia Plus, because it's not the Nugenia, unfortunately Nugenia did not took over this activity yet at least, but the Nugenia Plus aimed to integrate a community. And there is not better way of integrating a community than to mobilize people turning around that community, moving, going from one laboratory to the other, knowing people, meeting people, exchanging, and maybe. So it was a project initiative. It was not central, it was not coming from the Commission, it was coming by the project in the scope of integrating the community. That is the reason maybe that was limited because they want to have more than, and of course it was limited in access number of people because the funding is not, I mean you had the specific funding for the Nugenia Plus activity, and a part of that should be dedicated to the mobility. So it was limited, very limited. That's made that the number of access was very limited too. It was just for information. Yes, as my colleague Fivo said, in the future we may have, and this my director said yesterday, before yesterday, that we strongly supported the opening of Marie Curie tools for the nuclear community. I don't know yet the answer, if we are successful on that. But if we are successful, then the community, the students can profit of all these tools for mobility that are available in Marie Curie, the students of nuclear, I mean. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Takis. We have one
I
question.
want just to,
yes, please.
yeah,
The
for the Nugenia Plus, I'm sorry, but in the report, it's really written that they didn't had the advertisement done. So it's written explicitly. So this is why I've mentioned only this.
Okay, but okay, we can have a bilateral on probably on Nugenia Plus. In the Christoph, please, you have a question.
If I'm not mistaken, most of the mobility grants are restricted to people working or studying in Europe. And at university, we get a lot of inquiries from people not in Europe who like to come for studying short courses or longer courses. And these mobility grants, they cannot use them. And I think we lose a lot of possibilities not making possible for these people to come. They are looking for knowledge. We have the knowledge. We cannot provide this knowledge to them.
Yeah. I think around this topic there was and there's still a big debate on how to use these grants, if they should be used for European young students and we should retain in Europe the knowledge and build it and retain it in Europe, or do it abroad. So the talisman indeed had also China, Russia and US in the scheme. The other projects indeed not. So in the other projects, I know in Gentle, for instance, it was open to all European universities. It was open to students even if abroad, but they should have been enrolled in European universities. So we were not restricting on nationality, we were restricting on enrollment in universities. In Eugenia, I have to say, I don't know, it was not that much for students, it was more postdocs and professionals. But you don't address a university in China or in Russia or in the US with these grants, not, normally not.
Okay, thank you. Do we have other questions? Yes.
Anyone else more involved in ENEN Plus, but in the case of ENEN Plus, the grants work for people wanting to come to Europe, from Europe to another country in Europe, and from European going abroad. I believe that it is like that. Okay. Then there is a document of 8 or 12 pages, which is so in that case it is possible.